Welcome to Korean Kimchi, a spiced, amazing fermented food that's fantastic for your gut. A great project. It only takes 3 days to make. Use a kilo of veg.
This is so in Korea recently, studies have found that the longest living females on the planet are from Korea. One of the factors they found is in their diet they eat a lot of fermented foods such as kimchi. This is not saying that you will live the longest life if you have kimchi, but it's saying that it's a really healthy food. It's very full of beneficial bacteria for your microbiome, and it also tastes delicious. It brings a spicy acidity to any meal.
Yeah, it really is. It goes great. We eat it with most meals, or I certainly try to eat it at least once a day at one of my meals. It's easy to make. We're going to use a kilo of veg. There's a 3-day ferment process. The typical excuse that people make for not making kimchi is, I don't have time. But right now, most people are time rich. It's a great project. All you need is a kilo of veg, a few other ingredients in a jar.
So with this method, we're teaching you a framework approach. And if you want to learn more about this, check out our online vegan cooking course, because we'll teach you the framework. It's like the grammar of cooking. It teaches you how to cook without recipes. So details down below. But for this, we're using a kilo of veg. So whatever veg you have, here we're using carrots, leek, and pak choi.
Yeah.
Traditionally, it's a Chinese cabbage is used, but again, kilo of veg, whatever you have. So if you're using root veg, make sure to grate them. So I have carrots in this case. I could use parsnips, sweet potatoes. I could use pumpkin. I could use squash. I know these aren't root veg, but they're kind of dense, starchy veg.
And just to give you an example, we made kimchi last August. It lasts fantastically in the fridge. You know, it really does.
6 months old.
It lasts indefinitely. It's really, really good. Okay, so while Steve is grating the carrot, I'm gonna chop, I've got 1 leek, I'm gonna chop that, and I have 2 pak choys as well. So I've got 2 heads of pak choi, or use Chinese cabbage. I certainly prefer Chinese cabbage. We couldn't find it today.
Or even just a hard Dutch white or red cabbage will work fine too. With this, ideally you want your veg to be a similar size, so it'll just ferment to the same degree, and obviously it'll have that nice similar mouthfeel.
So we're just gonna add in our prep veg all into the carrots, the grated carrot. So we've got 1 big nice mixing bowl here. So as we said, we've got a kilo of veg, we've got leek, pak choi, carrot, and Stephen wanted a couple of radishes as well, just to give a pop of color.
Traditionally be a daikon radish used. We couldn't find daikon, so we're just using straight up radish. So we've got a kilo of prep veg. Now we're gonna add in our salt. So we're going with a 2% salt solution. So we have a kilo of veg, so that's 1,000 grams. 2% of 1,000 is 20 grams. So we're gonna go with 20 grams of salt, or 1 1/4 of finely ground salt. In that goes. What the salt is gonna do is it's gonna help the veg release. 1, it's gonna kill some bacteria. This is a lactic acid fermentation process. And 2, what it's gonna do is draw the moisture out of the vegetables, because we want this to be submerged during this lactic acid fermentation process.
So we used fine salt there, so it's better to use that rather than a granulated salt.
So we've kind of massaged in the salt. Ideally, I'd leave this sit for 2 hours. Even overnight is totally cool. What we've done a couple of times more short in time, we literally just massaged it quite aggressively for about 5-10 minutes, and that was grand too. So suit yourself. If you have more time, which most of us do at the moment, leave it sit for 2 to 3 hours. Next step, once you've completed this part, we're gonna give it a good rinse and just wash off that excess salt. So our veg has been cleaned from the excess salt. Traditionally what's made is a rice porridge that's been seasoned and spiced. We're gonna show you a quicker, easier way.
Okay, so what you're gonna need is a blender or a jug. So we've got 5 cloves of garlic. So as we said, this is a spiced, it's delicious, it is. 5 cloves of garlic.
If you don't like as much garlic, reduce it so you can tailor this. Half a medium-sized onion.
So this is a high-speed blender. If your blender is not a high speed or not that powerful, chop everything finely before this. I've got a thumb-sized piece of ginger. I'm gonna add it in whole because this will whisk it all up.
So traditionally there would be fish sauce used. We're gonna just put in about a teaspoon or a little bit over a teaspoon of any type. We're using wakame seaweed, any type of seaweed that's kind of granular or somewhat tiny that will blend up fine.
It's just gonna give an undertone of the sea to it.
Along with that, like what traditionally would be in fish sauce, that lovely umami flavor. So we're going in with 4 tablespoons of tamari.
We've got 25 grams of rice flour. If you don't have rice flour, you could just use normal flour. Rice is traditionally used.
Teaspoon of liquid sweetener. We went with maple syrup. And
finally, we've got 200 ml of water. That's just going to turn it into the porridge type sauce. So we're just going to blend that in the blender until it all comes together into a nice smooth sauce. Boom. Okay, so blend it until it all, like the room will smell very gingery, oniony, garlic. Oh my God, that's pungent. That'd like slay vampires. Okay, so we're just gonna add this into our salted vegetables that have been drained and rinsed.
So we're just gonna mix that round. At this point here, we're gonna add in our spices. So traditionally, a Korean dried chili pepper is used, which is known as gochugaru. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. I'm gonna go with 2.5 tablespoons, which this is an Irish palate that isn't that kind of used to really, really spicy. If you like it spicy, put in 4 tablespoons. And if you are kind of sensitive to spice, go at 1 tablespoon or even less.
Okay, what could I do if I don't have
gochugaru? If you don't have gochugaru, just mix equal part paprika and chili.
So would I add in a tablespoon of chili?
So I'd add in a tablespoon of paprika and a tablespoon and a half of chili powder. Sorry, a tablespoon of paprika and a tablespoon and a half of chili powder. So we're gonna go with 2.5 tablespoons, in this case of gochugaru. You'll see it has a more coarser, more interesting looking fleck, and it'll give it a much more traditional appearance.
It will give it that kind of red color. And the smoked paprika and the chili powder will actually do quite the same. Okay, so all that's left now is we're gonna put it in a jar and store it. What you're gonna do is leave it for 3 days to ferment at room temperature.
So what's gonna happen during this fermentation process? Ideally, as I mentioned earlier, this is a lactic acid fermentation process, means it should be submerged in water. So we're gonna put this in here and we're gonna try to ensure that it's just covered with its own juices. And what's gonna happen through this fermentation process is it's gonna increase in acidity as the lactic acid bacteria start to grow. So what's important, if you like it more acidic, leave it ferment for longer. If you prefer it less acidic, leave it ferment for less time.
Wow, that's proper.
That is hot. Okay, a couple of points to note. As with fermentation, time and temperature have a massive effect. If your room is 20 degrees or 24 to 27 degrees, this is an ideal temperature where fermentation will occur much quicker. So in that case, a day will probably suffice in terms of acidity. The best way of knowing is to taste it. If you live in Ireland, where room temperature could be anywhere from 5 degrees to 15 degrees,
5 degrees up to 23 degrees.
I'm speaking in Celsius, it's gonna take less time. It's gonna take longer time. So the easiest way to override any of this time and temperature thing is just to taste it. And once you are happy with the degree of acidity, put it in the fridge. That will keep temperatures below 5 degrees. It's going to slow down the fermentation process, meaning it's going to be stabilized. And literally it'll last for months. So what I always do with any fermentation thing is get a little bit of masking tape. I will ensure to write what it is and the date.
So any kind of label.
Because you will forget.
So any kind of label works perfect. It doesn't necessarily have to be masking tape. All that it is just make sure to label it, because this is very important. And a jar is really useful because it means that it's a lot easier to submerge it. When it's in a bowl, it's harder to have it submerged for the lactic acid fermentation process to happen. And once again, as we said, we cover fermentation quite in depth, all the various aspects in our Ultimate Vegan Cooking course. If you're interested in it, do check it out below. Let us know what you think of this. If you do make it, this is like rocket fuel. It really, really is.
And when you taste it right now, it'll taste very harsh, very raw. Through the fermentation process, it will soften. A lot of that will turn to kind of acidity. It'll be a lot more gentle, a lot more rounder tasting. And if you find garlic too strong, just reduce it. So I'm gonna leave that to ferment.
Are you gonna leave the lid on?
I'm gonna leave the lid slightly open. If you live in an environment where there's lots of danger of fruit flies, just cover it with a clean cheesecloth or any kind of clean J cloth, and leave it just sit for 2 to 3 days. Then we're gonna literally put the lid on once I'm happy with it, and I'm gonna put it in the fridge, and it lives there forever. Perfect
until you eat it.
Perfect condiment to go with any curry, any main, any stew, any sandwich. It just literally adds a burst of flavor, burst of acidity and juiciness.
Wow, you can see he is really into this.
Yeah.
But they call fermented food group often the forgotten food group. Fermented foods, as Stephen mentioned, are fantastically beneficial for your gut, for your microbiome. This food is really high in fiber, so it'll turn into a prebiotic in your gut. It's got lots of different bacteria and microorganisms that will really help encourage the healthy prosperity of the healthy microorganisms in your bowel, which supposedly there is 14 trillion of them.
So if you want to learn more about your microbiome and the importance of developing a healthy digestion, check out our Happy Good course too. Thanks for watching. Tag anyone who would like to make kimchi and would benefit. It does make a great present. Once it has fermented and it's in the fridge, just jar it up and
just make sure that the person does like spice.
Yeah. Thanks for watching. Cheers.